Hi, everyone. So now we want to talk about what is to change. When we say that what is to change is the mind of humans in order to bring life elements into balance and harmony, what exactly are we talking about? What is to change in the minds of humans? So that means we must talk about the original ignorance, meaning ignorance in its true meaning of the word means not knowing or not understanding. It doesn't necessarily mean flouting the way sometimes we take it when somebody says, oh, that's an ignorant person. That means we consider them unworthy or something, or we consider them not well-bred or brought up wrong or whatever. But ignorance in the sense of the Dharma is the root cause of suffering. Suffering it's like a bush with many, many, many brambles and branches and twigs and poison flowers. And the root of it is an ignorance of the actual nature of reality. Imagine that in the moment of differentiation of consciousness, these are words that, I could put this very differently, but this is the way I'm speaking of it today. The point at which an individual consciousness, let us say, as a manner of speaking, differentiates from mind itself, meaning emptiness, wisdom itself, and experiences I-ness, a sense of I, a sense of there being an existence that's identifiable and perceptible, that's one's own existence. We could say that's the birth of the self. It's not the birth of the self, it's the birth of the erroneous notion of there being a self. And this is the primary ignorance, the original ignorance that comes with the territory of being a sentient being. It's not something we created, but it's something that we can choose to perpetuate and build on, or something that we can choose to try to see through to the actual original nature from which it differentiated or arose. I want to say very clearly that something that the Dharma says very clearly, that grasping to this notion of a self-existing self, an intrinsically existing self, is the root of all suffering without exception. All suffering arises from self-grasping. Self-grasping gives rise to every form of suffering as possible to experience as a sentient being. Wherever there is suffering, even a slight unease, look within. If you're looking at yourself, look within, and you will find some form of what we call self-grasping at work in your mind stream, in your consciousness at that moment. So self-grasping isn't just what we call selfishness or self-consciousness or self-reference, although those are words that we sometimes use. It means grasping to this notion that what we identify as a self is pertaining to something that actually has intrinsic existence. It has existence as a concept for us. And on that concept, we build everything. The first thing that happens when that differentiation occurs and the identification of selfness occurs, the first thing that happens is that the next thing that happens, practically simultaneously, if we're looking in temporal terms, which doesn't make sense ultimately, but conveniently for speech, as soon as there is I, there is other. Instantly. And as soon as there's I and other, there can be everything unfolding along with fear and hatred and jealousy and confusion and wanting to grab something, wanting to push something away, and wanting to make up fables about it, to explain it. The I, other formulation is the beginning of both grasping love and aversion, hatred, and I don't mean love, authentic love, but grasping, clutching, wanting to have it, and then aversion, wanting not to have it or for it not to exist. And then the third of the three poisons is confusion, or this ignorance that we're talking about as being the beginning of the process of creating the field of suffering that is samsara. And it's not created just once, it's created over and over and over again. It has to be, because it's based on falsity, so it requires constant maintenance to have its have us have a sense of stability with the various identities that we take on. And that creation of and dissolution of identities is happening all the time. I'm going to read you some material from Brave, Generous, and Undefended about this to try to make it clearer and more concise than I can do it just speaking extemporaneously like this. But there is something I want to emphasize about this process when we say it's that self-grasping, grasping to the notion of there being a self, is the root of all suffering. It makes it sound like something like original sin, and perhaps that is what the term original sin actually refers to, but I don't know that because I wasn't trained in that tradition. But I want to say very clearly that this is an innocent error. The whole edifice of samsara is based on an error that is completely innocent. There's no malevolence whatsoever involved in thinking that one has an intrinsically existing self. There is simply a misunderstanding and a misattribution. So it's not out of badness that we create the basis for all suffering. It's just simply because we don't understand. It's confusion, that's all. But once the self has been created as a concept or as a notion in the consciousness of a sentient being, everything then rises or falls based on the sense of safety or sense of solidity, sense of central significance, and so on, of this selfness that we attribute reality to. So when we're looking at what needs to change in the minds of human beings in order for us to have a prospect of planetary continuation in a healthy way, a wholesome way for the planet and all beings who come from this planet, who dwell on this planet, who are made of this planetary body, it's very important for us to understand the false solidity that this notion of self gives us. We then compound at every possible turn. And the compounding of that, in order to give it stability, because it is inherently unstable because it's not true. It's like a fault line in a vessel when you're throwing a pot. If you're a potter, if there's a fault in the clay body, meaning, let's say our consciousness is the clay body. If there's a fault there, a glitch, a misunderstanding, every round of the wheel on which you're throwing the pot is going to show that misunderstanding as a weakness in the clay body and the wall of the pot. And there's no way to correct for it other than to take it down to where it started. Just below where that fault came in, you'd have to take it to that place of not knowing and let there be not knowing instead of attribution. That's possible to do in practice. We can do that. But in the meantime, we need to see some of the detriment that is created by the clinging that we all are doing to this false sense of self. So for that, I want to read just a little bit from Brave, Generous, and Undefended. This is pages 93 and 94, for anyone who has their book. And this is a comment, I'm reading now from the commentary on verse 9, which reads, "Like a dewdrop on a blade of grass, the happiness of the three worlds vanishes in but an instant. Strive for the supreme state of never-changing liberation. This is the way of a bodhisattva." So the supreme state of never-changing liberation is basically the mind abiding in its true nature, the true nature of being, that which neither comes nor goes, and the true nature of existence, that which is only and always coming and going. There, in traditional training of the Bodhisattva, there are 3 levels corresponding to 3 different vehicles of training in the Tibetan tradition of the Vajrayana. And the second level, and here I'm reading, calls for a radical shift of attention and intention to free our minds from enmeshment in materiality itself, the illusion-like worlds that arise in ignorance. Our challenge is not just that we preoccupy ourselves with the this and that of material existence, life in the world. It is that we identify with this particular material existence and with materiality and existence themselves. This is, of course, highly relevant to what we talked about in the morning, about the insubstantiality and impermanence of material existence in the form of our lives and our planet. The terms of our identification with existence, let's say with any form of material reality, require us not to notice that in some indefinable way we are more than it. So we're identifying with existence and required, therefore, not to notice that we are larger in some way than existence is. Or if we do notice, and we do frequently, though we may not register it consciously, we must agree not to take this as evidence of anything. So if we have some intuition that there is more to even our experienced reality than simply the terms of our material momentary material abiding, we have to gainsay that. We have to almost deny it, and we have to sometimes actually deny it. But that which we collude not to acknowledge is the very that which is our true nature and the true nature of all. It's not as if it's going away. Our bodies do over and over again, while our thatness, or our thisness, if you prefer, neither comes nor goes, and is ever exerting upon us the magnetism of truth. There's an underlying point here that I want to pull out as a particular bright thread. in every phenomenal form, whether it's a physical body or consciousness or an event, there is a blend and an interplay of ultimate and relative and absolute. It's not possible for it to be otherwise, because while we are material beings living in a material reality, that is always coming and going. There's nothing solid here. This is insubstantiality dressed up. And the absolute from which we arise, or whose play we are, in a sense, we might describe it that way, in which nothing is ever coming or going, cannot be spoken of, described, or characterized in any way. It can only be pointed to. It has no characteristics, but it has a dynamism of energy. The emptiness is described by Longchenpa, for example, in the basic space of phenomena as having a dynamic energy. The dynamic energy of emptiness is what allows a karmic cause in the mind stream to eventuate in a karmic fruition in the experienced phenomenal world, reality, experienced by you. So there's no such thing as a material being that is in any way separate from its own nature. The true nature of reality is all there is. We wouldn't call it truth if that weren't the case. It's all there is. And all that we see and experience in the play of phenomena, in a lived life experience, in a observation of that experience, in a recounting of it, in a concretizing of it, and in its coming and going, all that we experience in phenomenal reality can be beautifully described as the natural play of the absolute or the ultimate, or can be described as reflections of, but any way you describe it, it's still all a phenomenal appearance and experience is both cavorting in the relative or suffering in the relative and changeless, infinite, insubstantial, and self-luminous in its true nature. So when I talk about the magnetism of truth ever exerting its influence on us, it's truly true that the only source of truth is truth. So the longing for truth that we experience as beings caught in the web of substantiality, the longing for truth, is arising from truth as our nature. It's not coming from outside. It's who we are, lifting our longing from who we presently and momentarily be. Or I could reverse it and say it's what we be, momentarily piercing our illusions of what we momentarily are. We must continually remember that existence is marked by everything changing, good fortune and bad, friends and enemies switching place over and over, karma from the past pushing us from behind, the future just missed in our minds. There is no efficacy to striving for the supreme state of never-changing liberation while clinging to ever-changing worldly appearances. So it's not just because we find some aspects of of our relative reality condition, pleasant or desirable, it's not just that gives rise to our clinging. It's really that our grasping and clinging to our identities, to our ideas of what life ought to be, our rigid striations of good and bad. This is good, this is bad, I choose this, I don't choose that, based on personality characteristics and impact, not based on any criteria that have their roots in truth itself. These function for us as numbing agents or as anesthesia. And I think then we have to ask ourselves, what are we numbing ourselves to? And here I want to read a section that really points to a response in contemporary circumstances in the world, a response to what needs changing in the minds of humans. Well, first of all, if there is an intrinsic error at the very outset of the development of consciousness, that needs to be corrected. But we have embroidered realities based on realities on the basis of that original misconception or misattribution. So what we're most aware of are when we start looking for where there's faulty conceptualization and therefore elaborations that are basically of the nature of suffering, we need to be aware that we're looking at the end appearances, in some ways, of the original misconceptions. But that gives us a handle, it gives us a doorway for going into where the mind has gone astray from just simple being to existence is this or that or the other thing, and you're this, I'm that, and so on. We see a lot of you're this and I'm that going on in the world currently. Let me just read this section here. I hope it's not too boring that I'm reading out loud. I just want to be precise, and I can be more precise reading from what it took me 3 years to write than I can in this very instant, probably. So hold on a second. Okay. Remember what I said, that self-grasping is not selfishness, self-consciousness, etc. It's the grasping to the notion that a self exists. So all grasping is self-grasping. The thought of self is, from the beginning, a misapprehension of reality, a falsity. And because we are intrinsically one with truth, this falsity, like the fault line in a vessel, means fragility, and fragility means fear. We must strive constantly to maintain our conviction in solid existence, to protect and reinforce it. And because the thought of self instantly establishes the duality of self-other, we shore up our supposed selfness and react to perceived otherness with all the identity markers we can devise. This is the profound error that underlies xenophobia, misogyny, racism, homophobia, and all forms of othering, thinking and behavior that solidify and fixate on others as fundamentally, essentially other, as alien. To invalidate beings in this way makes it possible, even desirable and easy, to fear, hate, and harm them. We can do this to ourselves too, thinking of ourselves as other, somehow wrong or invalid, hating and harming ourselves. All fear is self-grasping. All self-grasping is fear. Without self-grasping, no fear. Without fear, no self-grasping. This is the profound teaching of the fearless Bodhisattva Garchen Rinpoche. All of this is innocently born of error, the erroneous notion of solid, inherently existing selfness in ourselves, in others, in things and phenomena, even in non-material phenomena like thoughts and emotions. This is the error that gives rise to our grasping to worldly appearances and identities. And this, my dear friends, is what we need to change. We need to change. Most of us start the process by changing the outer expressions of this profound ignorance, this profound misconception. So we may see ourselves engaging in habitual behaviors of attributing this or that to another group, or another political party, or another national group. We may be able and maybe even willing to see ourselves engaging in activities of body, speech, and mind that we can actually sense, particularly if we're thinking about things in the way they were talking about today, that we can actually sense are arising from our own feeling of being threatened in some way, or of being inadequate, of being too weak, or being not smart enough, or not educated enough, and not the right color skin, or whatever it may be, that we differentiate ourselves and others differentiate us along whatever lines that may be. Eventually, what we come to, if we're practitioners, and we're actually doing authentic spiritual practice, looking for the roots of our confusion and are acting it out in ways that are harmful to ourselves and others, and to our communities and our countries and our nation and our planet, we might then, on the basis of sincere practice over a period of time, we might then come to recognize the moment in the mind. It happens all the time, but we don't always see it. The moment in the mind when we're grabbing a hold of some facet of our self-identification as a fixed identity that individuates us, that just makes us distinctive, whether negatively or positively. And when we see that motion of the mind, we're right where we need to be. That's the motion that indicates that self-grasping is about to elaborate itself into behavior or speech of some sort that solidifies our self-identification. When you see that moment, you might just sense it in the mind, a little movement to claim something about yourself, or your group, or your family, or your language group, or your race, or whatever. You can see the grasping. When you see any form of grasping, look within, turn the attention within, cultivate the inward attention, and follow the trail that goes back to your grasping for selfness. However, in that instant you're identifying it, it can be conveniently referred to as the erroneous notion of self. Selfness, that is self-grasping. And when you come to the place in your inward attention, your contemplation, where you become aware, consciously aware, or perhaps energetically aware, perhaps it's just a little movement of energy and there isn't really much concept available yet, be aware that that tightening, that slight rigidifying, or that grasping, that's an indicator that you are looking for something to grab hold of and to bolster and to fixate upon your notion of selfness. In that instant that you become aware of that, stop. Just stop. That doesn't mean some violent motion of stopping. It means simply refrain from the next step, which normally we take in that moment. Refrain from continuing that embellishment. Refrain from adding another link in the chain of delusion that is based on the erroneous concept of selfness and has as its intention to bolster and solidify and make impregnable, basically, the notion of self. You simply pause. You take a break from the normal habituated pattern that you follow in that instant. You just abstain. You take hands off, basically. You remove the potential next link. You don't make the link. You leave a gap there. And you rest in that gap. Just looking at mind that was reaching for something solid and discovered insubstantiality, and rests at ease for a moment there. In that gap, you can see the actual nature of your mind. It's empty, open, undefined and undefining. And it doesn't usually last long, that instant, particularly at first. But the moment in which you saw the beginning of an elaboration that was going to solidify your selfness, the moment when you saw the beginning of that and did not engage with it, is the moment that your mind started to taste itself in freedom. And that's the moment that we will continue to practice with over and over and over again. We don't try to hang on to it. That's grasping, and all grasping is self-grasping. But we just let go. We just let go. We don't continue that very well-practiced habituation of continuing to build identity and selfness and hang on to them and beat other people over the head with them and so on. This is the mind that needs to change in human beings, and human beings have the capacity to make this kind of change because we have that kind of capacity of self-awareness. And what sees, and I'm not saying other beings do not, I have no idea whether a raccoon does or not. I mean, I'm serious, I'm not joking. I do not think that human beings have the capacity to know the mental capacities of other forms of life, because of all of our methods of trying to assay that, to see what that is, are created by us. So it's not exactly a phenomenological study, you know. So my mind just got taken up for a moment with that little raccoon, so I've lost my thread. I'll get it back. Oh yes, every moment of not doing that habituated thing that we always do of continuing to build and elaborate the self, every time we don't do that, the self-grasping habituation has less hold over us. Every single time. I highly, highly urge you at this moment in our planetary history to recognize that that apparently simple non-doing is the key to making the kinds of changes that give us a perhaps quite different future. The person who rests in a non-grasping mind is the person who welcomes all beings to the spacious, open, love-illumined, natural state of beingness, which can transform the experience of existence, opening the window directly to the true nature. Let's do a little of that practice. Would you like to? Feel free to raise your hands. Maybe I'll have some subtle perception of them waving. Let's do a little practice on what we've just been hearing about. I'd like you to sit in a comfortable position. This is not a strict or fancy or elaborate thing we're going to do here. We're going to just be who we are, as we are in this moment, sitting however we're sitting, but it's good to have your spine erect. Not stiff at all, not at all stiff, but upright, so the energies move freely. And let your head bobble around on the top of your neck a little bit. Just sort of loosen up your neck. Shrug your shoulders a few times. And now quickly, swiftly, whenever you hear the gong that I'm going to sound, at that instant, I want you to turn your gaze within you and practice it now before we actually start the meditation practice. Sitting and looking, eyes open. This meditation is not with the eyes closed, but open, not staring, and not necessarily straight ahead. Some people find that the natural position, but others do better with the gaze partly down, as if it were like halfway between the horizon and the tip of your nose. That's a very good angle of view. Eyes open, not staring, not fixed position of the eyes. You're free to blink. And the gaze is soft, unfocused. Not unfocused in the sense of blank, but just you're not grasping with your eyes, your eye energy. You're not grasping. You're not trying to identify anything. You're just observing. You know what it's like when you sit by a campfire or by moving water? You're sitting there and you're watching the flames or the little wavelets on the water, but you're not becoming engrossed with a particular flame or spark, or you're not becoming engrossed with a particular wave. You're just seeing wave and water as one. It's actually an experience of non-duality. We don't usually recognize it as such, but there's a reason that people feel so relaxed and so refreshed and renewed after a time of gazing into the fire or gazing at the moving waters. We're actually seeing wave and water as one, flame and fire as one. So just see that, eyes open, just taking it in, and you're just simply watching it unfold, watching it happen. You're not doing anything with it at all. And now, on the basis of that, turn the gaze within. Turn your gaze, your attention within, and look at what is looking at that wave on water, or what is looking at thought and mind, what is looking at fire and flame. Just touching gently, not grabbing for anything, not elaborating, not making anything up or pushing anything away. You observe what's happening in the mind, and then for just an instant you draw the energy, you draw the gaze within, and you look at the mind itself that's looking. You look at what is seeing. This is your clear awareness. You're looking at your clear awareness. And what is looking at the clear awareness? That is clear awareness too. It's your same way that you look at the can of soup and to find out what its label is. That same way exactly. You turn the attention within, you look at the mind, you see what's happening, and you just gaze. You simply gaze at it. You don't grab anything or push anything away or make up any stories about it. And when you find that the mind has in fact done one of those things, it's like, oh, that's a good thought, or oh, better not think about that. I'm sitting in a temple. Anything that you do with anything that arises in the mind, then you just see that as another arising. You don't label it. You don't have to do anything with it other than just say, oh, another arising if you want to. Otherwise, you just gaze and just sit there for a little bit. So this is to practice the inward attention that with clear awareness discerns the condition of mind and its activity. All right, is it clear? All right, so I'm going to sound the gong once, and that will open a period for this contemplation. We're not even going to call this a meditation. We're just going to call it a contemplation for the moment. And then I'll let us be in that for a few minutes, and then or maybe less or more, and then I'll gong twice, and then we come back to ordinary attention and consciousness, bring ourselves back into the room. Okay? Okay, now just sort of refresh yourself, move around a little bit. And again, when I sound the gong, draw the attention within, draw your inward attention, bring it in. So you're simply gazing within, eyes open, relaxed, very relaxed posture. Sometimes people feel that inward attention as almost an energetic movement within. That's fine too. And when you stabilize that gaze within, then just rest there for a while and just observe. And then from time to time, ask yourself, what sees this? Just allowing that little play to go on. Oh, what sees this? Okay. Perhaps in that interval, of contemplation, some of you were having the experience of seeing something arising in the mind and then dissolving before you could even get around to doing something with it or not doing something with it. It arose and dissolved sort of on its own. That's the natural movement of the wave and the water, yes? That's the natural mind into which the arising, which is not other than the mind's nature, returns. Okay, so move yourself around again, refresh yourself. Now take a moment just in a natural way as you're sitting in your place, wherever you happen to be, to just gaze around the room with that same open, non-grasping gaze. You're not looking to take something down off the wall or, reorganize the furniture or whatever. You're just looking around with that same open gaze and, again, the inward attention. As you're looking around your room, just gazing, at the same time, the mind is available to your gaze because the attention, while outwardly appearing to look, is also inwardly gazing. So you're looking outside and inside simultaneously. And you feel free to move your body as you do this gazing around the room. You turn your head and let your spine move and your shoulders relax. You're just looking the way you might look if you were sitting by the beach, sitting on a beach looking out at the ocean. And there's nothing really happening there. There's just ocean, waves and water. Maybe a boat goes by occasionally. But because you're gazing in this open, non-grasping way, this just allowing to be what is, even the boat suddenly appearing isn't an item of attention for you. It's just another appearance, arising momentarily, and then it goes off the frame, as it passes across your gaze, your vision. So enjoy that play of the mind and the gaze interacting. Looking, not grasping, not pushing away, just observing. Not even close enough to say observing, just gazing, just gazing. And then you come back to center position again. The spine again elongates slightly and the head comes to center. And again, you're looking straight ahead, but slightly down. Again, there's no staring. The eyes are simply taking in what is and not having any particular relationship to it. It's just mind and gaze. And now maybe it's not quite so clear what's in and out. Maybe mind is having a little bit of a taste of seeing appearances and mind as related. So with that, we'll contemplate again for a little bit. Now, if we were sitting in the same room together, I would ask you to say a few words about what you observed and what you experienced. And since we're not in that one room together in a physical way, I invite you to say to yourself out loud what you observed, what you experienced. Or if you're aware of my gaze into the camera, I'm looking at you. You can speak to me in that way, saying what you observed, what you experienced. And now for a second, drop back into the mind that has its attention turned inward. Looking again into the mind, inward attention. Excellent. Excellent. Well done. And now say to yourself, what sees that? What sees that? Just like that. And now I invite you to let your attention go for a moment. Doesn't have to be lengthy, just for an instant, to your bodily feeling of it, your feeling of embodiment. How are you in your body? What are you aware of in the region of your heart? The spiritual heart center, not your physical heart organ. How is your heart feeling right now? And how are you breathing? What is your breath like right now? The in and out. And now again, simply the simple, unself-conscious, just relaxed, ordinary way of looking first outward, just at what's around, and then draw that gaze within, again opening the inward attention, and letting that inward attention include also the whole body and the surrounding space that you're in. And now enlarge that field of your inward attention perception to include your whole room, and then space all around the building that you're in, or wherever you're sitting, outdoors or in. And expand that inward attention to include inward experience of the atmosphere, the ground, the sky, and gradually become aware with the inward attention as well as the outer attention of you and the planet in relationship. Again, no grasping, no elaboration, just presence. Presence and awareness. Clear awareness and embodied presence. In simple, direct relationship with the living, present, motherly earth. The lap of our existence. And as we grow up, even in this moment, sitting here like this, we're growing up, becoming more adult. As we grow up, we want to take care of the motherly presence and being that has taken care of and always is taking care of us. So this is a great expansion and deepening of our awareness in this moment, but it's still the same clear awareness with which we look at that can of soup to discern its label, the mundane and the grand. This is our intersection of person and planet. It is fecund, it is fertile, it's co-creative. We co-create with the mother. And be aware now of your breath, which has deepened and become more resonant and warmer in your body, perhaps. And gradually come back into the more, shall I say, ordinary awareness. Observe yourself becoming more aware again of the room that you're in, space around you, and I will gong 2 times, and then gradually allow yourself to simply come back to ordinary awareness. No hurry. I invite you now, if you have something to write with, to simply write down a few words. Registering something of this experience of contemplation. What has been meaningful for you, or any question arising, or an insight. In this kind of practice of the inward attention, we're directly experiencing what I might call the intersection of personal and ultimate, let's say of relative and ultimate, because clear awareness is seeing the conditioned mind and the mind in its present condition, not intervening, not trying to change anything, just seeing it. And that clear awareness is your own natural awareness. It's not anything fabricated or created. It's simply the way in which we see. And when turned within, it's the way in which we see the condition of our mind. And when practicing over a period of time, sometimes quickly, sometimes very long period of time, and sometimes in glimpses, sometimes in fairly long experiences, what is seeing the condition of mind, meaning that which is coming and going and moving, the thoughts arising and dissolving and are getting involved and then not doing so, is also, it's the same clear awareness that sees the actual nature of the mind, the true nature of our mind, which is the true nature of all phenomena and the true nature of reality itself. So this very simple, unelaborated and non-elaborating practice is the key. And the essence of every practice that seeks to see truth directly. And it is possible to do so. This mind of an ordinary sentient being has the capacity to see its true nature. At that point, ignorance starts to fall away. It is said that one moment of suchness, one moment of seeing directly the true nature, purifies a mountain of non-virtue. And Garchen Rinpoche teaches that in every moment that we dwell, even for an instant, in that true nature, seeing directly, is also a moment in which our Buddha qualities expand, the enlightenment qualities inherent, intrinsic in our mind's nature, expand. So both purification of the negative and expansion and amplification of the positive, this kind of practice engages both. And I've heard Rinpoche say that that's the definition of Buddha, all negative purified and all positive expanded. So this is what's called taking the result as the path. We aspire to the ultimate Buddhahood in order to free all beings from the ignorance that obscures that inherent purity. That's the ultimate aspiration. So we walk the Bodhisattva path, and the steps of the path coalesce beneath our feet as we walk. We follow in the footsteps of the great ones who've accomplished, and little by little, in their radiant shadow, we purify and expand. This is the mind of human being changing, to take responsibility for that which is true, and gradually to allow fall away that which is false. I remember in early years of study feeling a very touching resonance with a phrase, this phrase, the tone or resonance of truth. From childhood, the only thing I sought was truth. I didn't have lots of names for it, and I wasn't so much interested in religion, but I was interested in truth. And I feel as if I have spent my entire life listening for that note, listening for that sound, sensing for that resonance. And I want to say that that quest, or that open-hearted sensing, searching, has its result, which is degrees of freedom, very discernible, very discernible. There are stages on the path, and systems may describe those stages differently. Pay attention to the words that catch you and will not let you go, whether they're the sound of a particular mantra or a syllable or a concept like the resonance of truth. In fact, I had a wonderful experience in my earlier years. I was an adult and I owned a home, and I had to have a new leach field dug so that all the water systems would drain and go out into the earth in a beneficial way. And the people who were constructing the leach field were soils scientists, and they wanted to instruct me about how to participate, which I was very eager to do. And so they dug, you've probably seen in fields in rural areas where there's construction of residences going on, these white tubes that are inserted into the ground. They go all the way down into where the ground is dry. And then I was instructed to go out once a week. This was in New England. It was hard to do this in the winter, but I did my best. There's a lot of snow. To go out once a week and drop a pebble into the tube, one of the tubes. They defined a signal tube that I was to use for this purpose, to drop a pebble in and listen for the sound of the pebble hitting bottom. We didn't want to hear water. We wanted to hear the sound of dry. That would show that the leach field could absorb water. If it sounded like water, it wasn't going to absorb very well. And I was already a practitioner by then, and I was on retreat during a large part of this period. And I would go out every day. They said once a week, but I started doing it every day because it became part of my practice. I would find my pebble, and I would go to the tube, and I would drop the pebble down into the tube, and I would listen for the sound of truth. It stays with me as a very, it's a good image. It was a good experience. I developed a keen ear. And of course, the leach field was very successful. But more important for me, I cultivated a respect for that which, as a child and young person, had sometimes been derided and made fun of by others, including adults, actually. You know, what's with Barbara? She's not interested in what we're interested in. What is she doing? You know, I was listening for the sound of truth. So it was very funny for me that I finally had a confirmation of that inner activity in a leach field. It seems very fitting. So that's apropos of saying, or by the way of saying, when a certain concept catches you and won't let you go, follow it. And I'm not talking about chocolate cake, in which some of us overindulged perhaps recently, myself particularly perhaps at the most recent meal. Right? But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the words to which you resonate. Something in you leaps up when you hear a certain phrase, or something in you settles in with confidence when you hear a certain phrase or a certain word. Pay attention to those. Those are signals for you of what your mind is already knowing as indicators, as markers on your path for truth. Pay attention. And then consciously follow them where they lead you. And it's good to have a little notebook so that you can jot things down when you're out in the leach field of sentient beings. So with that, we'll take a little break. I do want to say before we go for a break, well, this will be a little tea break, maybe about 15 minutes or so. I do want to say that my experience of your contemplation during that practice interval that we were in at various stages, my experience of your practice was that it was very clear and very good-hearted. There was warm-heartedness in your practice with yourself. I think that is a very important signal to pay attention to, that when you cultivate the inward attention and are present with yourself in that way, you are the warm-hearted being who has the potential for great love. So, through the camera and the energetic wisdom display, that's what I experienced sitting with you in that way. So, let's take a little break.